Walawani, welcome. My name's Ian Campbell from Palliative Care Australia, in Canberra on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. Welcome to Thursdays at 3, our regular series of conversations with people living and working at the end of life. Today's episode takes us to the US to meet two of the three people behind the Palliative Story Exchange, which is one of the highlights of National Palliative Care Week this May. Alexis Drutchas is a palliative care physician at Massachusetts General Hospital and assistant professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School. Richard Leiter is a palliative care physician, writer and researcher at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and Brigham and Women's Hospital, and an assistant professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School. Both Alexis and Ricky join us from Boston. Hello guys, how are you going?
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you.
Thanks so much for making time for us, especially across the time zones. It's about 9:30 p.m. your time, so really appreciate you getting us in at the end of a long day. And we should acknowledge the third amigo that is missing from your team, Rachel Rusch, who is a palliative care social worker, educator and researcher at the Children's Hospital Colorado, and an assistant professor of Paediatric palliative medicine at the University of Colorado. And tonight she's a mum of a sick toddler. We've all been there, done that, and know of that experience and know of the importance of that role. So a shout out to Rachel with her sick toddler tonight. The Palliative Story Exchange will be new to many Australians, and I can't wait to introduce them to the idea and introduce them to you guys during National Palliative Care Week on Friday, the 16th of May. But what is the Palliative Story Exchange? What's the story of the Palliative Story Exchange? Who wants to start?
Sure, I guess, yeah. I'm happy to. And just to say, we are thrilled to be here. We are thrilled to be participating in National Palliative Care Week. It's like one of the highlights of our year. And, you know, we are just really, really excited to bring the Palliative Story Exchange to the palliative care community in Australia. It's just wonderful for us. So the story of the Palliative Story Exchange. So we go back now, I guess it's almost 6-7 years, where I was interviewing Alexis for our fellowship in palliative care. And Alexis was like, you know, had already had a career as a family medicine doctor, had done all of these amazing things, was a writer. And so I met Alexis and we like instantly hit it off. You know, we connected in that interview. We spent the whole time geeking out about writing and narrative and all of those things. And when Alexis matched with our program, I was like thrilled. It was like, this is amazing. This is going to be great. And it was. And so fast forward a few months and we were working together one weekend and we were walking back to our offices after seeing a patient, and Alexis turned to me and said, you know, wouldn't it be great if one night in the spring we went to someone's backyard, you know, had a fire pit going, opened up a bottle of wine, and told stories about the work that we do as a way of connecting and debriefing and really getting to know each other better, but really getting to know each other. And I said, you know what, we've got to do it. Well, that was January 2020. And so a few weeks later, everything kind of crumbled around us with the pandemic. Alexis was working on the end of life, the COVID end of life unit at Mass General. I was in the ICUs leading an embedded team at Brigham and Women's Hospital in the COVID ICUs. It was horrible. And, you know, it was really hard and meaningful work. And there was so much suffering that we were a part of coming up against, really enmeshed in. And we were isolated, we were scared, we were feeling alone. And we were texting back and forth through the whole thing. And we said, you know what? That event that we need to, you know, that we were talking about, we need to do that. We need to tell stories to understand what's going on. So it was a Monday night in June of 2020, and we had about 40 people or so from the two palliative care divisions at Mass General and Dana-Farber Brigham. They all got on Zoom and we told stories. And it was stories of what we were going through. You know, it was stories about what it was like to take care of our patients. It was stories about what it was like to go back to the grocery store after the initial lockdowns were were lifted, and how strange and surreal that felt. We laughed. There were a lot of tears. There was a sense of connection. And we started hearing from everyone afterwards, that thing that you did, do more. It was a really wonderful event for us. We heard that from our colleagues, from our leaders, and they wanted us to do more. And that was the birth of Palliative Story Exchange. Alexis, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ricky. I love hearing that story. It's really grown from there. When we started, I think we thought it would be either a one-off or a quarterly session that we had in Boston amongst, Dana-Farber and MGH are very much connected through the fellowship, and many people train together, so there's community there. But as Ricky said, given the impact that people really came away with, it was clear that we wanted to fuel more of these. So we started to do quarterly events in Boston. And then from there, it really grew. We went to the International Palliative Care Congress in Montreal and had an amazing in-person event with storytellers from all over the world, really. From there, we had an event at Memorial Sloan Kettering's World Hospice, celebration of World Hospice and Palliative Care. And since then, it's really grown. And I think what we've seen is a couple things. One, it feels like every time there's an incredible sense of connection and a sense that really of affirmation and validation of a lot of the grief that I think we hold in our work. And we might talk about them as sort of cases or get people's thoughts, or in passing, we might say, wow, that was a really hard family meeting. But there's something about being in the space where your only role there is to listen to other people's stories and to reflect or to share a story that was really special and different from the other places that we'd seen or accessed ourselves to really debrief and reflect on the work and the meaning of the work. So it really started to grow from there. And we've done conferences, the annual Assembly of Hospice and Palliative Care, Palliative Medicine. We were there in Denver this past year. We've been at Ariadne Labs, Serious Illness Summit. And just like you, we've sort of had people reach out to us saying, can you do this? And we've had some pretty incredible survey data and feedback that we're happy to talk about too, that I think is really fueling and inspiring us to keep going in this work beyond the community creation that this event has.
I feel like the Palliative Story Exchange and just that the culture of sharing a story taps into the caveman, the cave woman that is still inside of us all. And Ricky, when I heard you talking about, the idea of just sitting around a fire with a bottle of wine, sharing stories, we've all been in those magical experiences, and I get goosebumps thinking about it. But yet we need to be reminded of the power of those events all the time. What's going on here? Why do we need to be reminded of something that feels so right and so intrinsic to us as humans? Why do we need to keep being reminded of this?
Such a great question. And I think you're like speaking our love language here in the Palliative Story Exchange. We live our lives through stories, right? And we know through stories, we learn through stories, we connect through stories, right? That's like a given. It's part of who we are. And you're right. I think that it is so much easier to stay at the surface, right? How often have you been asked, how's your day been? And even if care, and we're like we're people who connect and emote and do all of those things. And what do we say? We say, yeah, it was okay. And we don't go into the story of what it was like to sit at the bedside with that dying patient, or to comfort that patient's family member, or to have a moment of joy with someone with a serious illness, right? Those aren't the stories that we go to right away. But what we found is that when you scratch the surface, those stories are there every single time. And we hear from our participants, they say, I never considered myself a storyteller, but once you asked, the story was right there. People are hungry for this, not only to tell the stories, but to listen to the stories, to reflect on the stories. It's like like you said, it's so much a part of who we are that we believe the Palliative Story Exchange sort of harnesses that energy and gives it life.
I guess the one thing I just want to add to echo on top of that is that it's a really different feeling to listen to stories without any need or responsibility to fix. Our only role there is to listen, and we can speak a little bit more about some of the guiding principles that we set out beforehand, but we really ask the audience to be as present as possible with the only job of deep listening to then reflect back to the storyteller. Either something beautiful they heard, something they connected with, a line that is sticking with them, or there's a lot of resonance of sort of, that happened to me too, or that reminds me of my dad, or that reminds me of a patient I took care of. So I think while storytelling is as old as humans, there is something about being a clinician, but not being asked to do anything further with someone's story. Like, your role is to be present with it. And that's been really beautiful.
Alexis, you've given us, I guess, a little bit of a sneak peek of how a story exchange works. And as I mentioned, we're doing this with you guys during National Palliative Care Week on the Friday, the 16th of May. We've got an hour set aside to spend time in this sacred space that you guys create. How does it work? What will people who take part see? How does it work? What's the practicalities of it?
Yeah, I'm happy to start us off, and then I can pass it to you, Ricky, too. So I would say logistically, how it starts is that there's a call for storytellers, which is completely volunteer for people to sign up and tell a story. Usually the prompt we use is as broad as, what can you not stop thinking about? What are you bringing home with you? And I think that really allows stories to have a lot of breadth to them. So that there's not one particular theme. Some stories are funny, some are sad, some are a mix of all of those emotions. And then people who are interested sign up online, and they give us a little bit of information about them, where they work, what their professional background is, what the story's tone might be, so that we can create, a cohesive lineup of stories. So over an hour, usually it would be usually around 4 stories. And we really love having interprofessional storytellers. That's been very important to us. And in fact, when we looked at our data, over a third of all participants have been from social work, and only about 20% have been, MDs or DOs. And so we also look at that and just make sure that there's interprofessional representation from storytellers as well. And then we generally read the stories beforehand, just to make sure that that they're sort of in line with the overall goal of this work. We set a storytelling lineup, and then the day of when we're there, the 3 of us, set about to give a little background, as we did today, about the Palliative Story Exchange, the creation of it, why we're doing this work. And we set up some guiding principles, some foundational principles for the audience and for the storyteller, to guide our time together. I'll turn it over to Ricky to any details of that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Alexis. So and just a shout out to Rachel here, who, has really helped us craft foundational principles that set up a safe and brave space for everyone. I mean, we want people to come in, with their hearts and minds open, and being able to receive these stories and respond to them. And for the storytellers to, some of these stories are hard and they're emotional, they reflect the work that we do. And we want people to be able to bring that to the story exchange as well. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the environment that we set up. Our storytellers, very deliberately, we have them read their stories. This is not about performing. There are storytelling interventions that do that. They're wonderful. That's not what we're going for. We want people to lower the activation energy, right? Just to read the story. They don't have to memorize it. They don't have to perform it. So they read the story, and then after each story, one of the 3 of us will guide the group in a reflection. Alexis alluded to this earlier. It's like, what resonated with us? I might say, Alexis, that story was so beautiful. And what really struck me was the moment that you transported us back to the ship that you were on, because that reminded me of when I was early in my career and I had a patient, and I go on there, or I have not experienced, and we have this with our international exchanges, we hear this a lot, I've never experienced a patient situation exactly like you're describing, but I felt that emotion in the room. And it's amazing because in those moments, in those reflections, we can feel the group come together. And Ian, you mentioned like getting goosebumps. This happens to us every single time where we kind of look over each other. We're like, it happened, because you can feel the group come together. So we do that, after some reflection, we'll then move on to the next storyteller. And then at the end, we take some time to wrap things up, so that, because we've taken people to a pretty, emotional space. So we take some time to deliberately sort of bring them back to the rest of their day afterwards.
You've been doing this since 2020, and you mentioned the feedback, the impact that you've had along the way. Give us a sense of what people have told you about taking part in the story exchange.
The feedback has been remarkable. And so we've had, I think now we're over 2,500 participants, starting with that group of 40 on that Monday night in June, so over 2,500 participants from around the world. And we've done some sort of post then pre surveys after they leave. So saying, compared to before you came in, how do you feel about a number of things? And what we found is that nearly universally, the numbers are pretty wonderful. They say people feel like their stories matter more than when they came in. They feel like stories can connect us more than they came in. They feel connected to the wider palliative care community, at greater proportions than when they came in. And then the qualitative feedback that we've got that's the best part. I mean, people, the comments we get are like, more of this. Give us more. Or I think someone wrote, we talk about and we think about how to help self-care in medicine, in healthcare. This is it. This is the way. Alexis, what am I missing?
No, that's exactly it. We sort of looked at the themes from feedback that people gave us, and looked at sort of the number of times folks used words like connection, powerful, touching, community, reminder, meaningful. And they really kind of came to the surface with so many more qualitative comments that people left us. And so, as Ricky said, I think universally there's been this sense that people in healthcare are hungry for this and for these spaces. And as you said, storytelling is not new. In some ways, we're doing it all the time with patients, with each other at, interdisciplinary meetings. But there's something about setting aside time and having a framework for it that builds sort of a psychologically safe and brave community that we're finding is different, and that people are really wanting to access more and more. And so our goal is really to create pilot sites around the country, if not around the world, to train facilitators to do this work and keep on studying the impact to make sure that it's meaningful and that it's growing in a meaningful way.
Alexis, you lead me to a loose thought that I was having around making this part of a day, part of a week, with the multidisciplinary team that you're a part of in a hospital or in a hospice. And I guess taking what you guys do at a face-to-face event or an online event like we're doing during Palliative Care Week, and bringing a little bit of that into the everyday. How do you do that? Have you seen people do that, sort of bring this to their everyday?
That's a good question. There's certainly little bits. I think the health humanities in our everyday, at least at the MGH community, that I see, starting a meeting with a poem or a song that's resonating or things like that. I haven't seen this kind of storytelling be brought into the daily community. I think that would be something really interesting to think about. I also think it's an emotional space. We're opening a certain container for people. And so I do think it needs a framework and a time when you're really going to go deep into stories and allow them to sort of permeate how you're feeling. So I think it would be a balance. I think, how can we show up for each other and our colleagues? And when we say, hey, Ricky, how are you? We're not just saying, oh, I'm good. I think it is creating some of those spaces. But in terms of hearing 4 or 5 stories, I do think having dedicated time would be helpful. But certainly we're thinking a lot about how to grow this work. Right now, it's the 3 of us that are facilitators. And just a couple of weeks ago, we got done with a Harvard Radcliffe Accelerator workshop, which was sort of a workshop grant we got through the Radcliffe Institute to bring in some experts in storytelling and palliative care and social work and research from all over the country to think about how to grow this. So definitely facilitator training, a retreat, a community of practice to help people bring this into their own organizations is very much top of our mind. Ricky, anything to add to that?
Well, Ricky, I was just thinking, what's your advice for people who want to tell a story, have something to share, have something that's been on their mind and in their heart, as you say, that keeps coming up for them, but they're perhaps a bit nervous, a bit reluctant to put themselves forward? We're inviting people to do just that at the moment, to submit a story for our event with you guys on the 16th of May. But what would you say to people who are a bit nervous about sharing a story in a space like this and putting themselves out there?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that you're not alone in being nervous about this. We hear this from people all the time, and I think we used to tell stories ourselves when we first getting started, and I would get nervous telling my story because it's a vulnerable space, right? And every time I told a story, I felt better afterwards. I felt more connected. It was an incredibly meaningful experience for me. And we hear that from our participants over and over again. They say, I was nervous going in. I am so glad that I did this. And even more than that, I am so glad that I told this story because this is the one that's been sticking with me. And I'm glad that I was able to share it. And I see that story in a new light based on the reflections. So I think, what we would say to people is join us, like submit a story idea, get in touch with us. Like we are here to help, and truly we make this an inviting and as comfortable a space as possible, where our storytellers feel held and supported and appreciated by not only us, but by everyone in the room, whether that's a virtual room of like 10 people, or it's a room of a few hundred. They really do feel that love and connection. So please, join us, submit the idea, tell the story. We would love
to
go.
Yeah.
Alexis, I think you touched on it before around the joy that is often a part of palliative care and end-of-life care work, which I think often gets forgotten. When we talk about palliative care, straight away you go to the grief, the trauma, the sadness. And yes, that's a part of this work and our community. But also important to remember the opportunity to share stories of joy, I think, that come from this time. And I guess having that mix of stories at a story exchange is really important.
I completely agree. I do think our minds, when we think of palliative care, we think of that sad hand-holding image that I know we're all trying to get away from. And even if a story is sad, there's often some comedy in it from a lot of people. I think we heard a story just 2 weeks ago where someone was talking about their experience during the HIV/AIDS crisis, and there was a lot of different experiences that were difficult. And then when it was reflected back from the audience, there was a whole different sort of lens to look through it in a hopeful way. And she brought up how hopeful the story made her feel. And so even there, I think there's some joy and some meaning making that might be different than the way the writer thought about it. So certainly, I think some stories and some writers just have a knack at putting humor into their stories. And other times there's a lot of joy and meaning from hearing it from the audience too. So I think that's another important thing. Just to echo on to what Ricky said, certainly if you're feeling nervous to submit a story, we are there with you, and we felt that, and it takes courage, and we would love you to do that. And also, if you want to join as a listener, like that's really the bulk of who is participating, is those people coming on to listen. And then it might inspire you to write, hopefully the next time around when we do this.
Guys, the other thing that I really love about what you guys do and the event that we're partnering in on the 16th of May is that it's an online event, and often when people register for an online event, they do so in order to get the recording after the event to watch it. But you've been very clear that this isn't recorded. You don't get the recording afterwards. To take part, you need to be there. Make this time, be there at the time on the day to take part. Why is that important, do you think? What's going on there that is important to you?
So there are a few reasons why we do it. One is confidentiality and safety. Our storytellers are being vulnerable. They are sharing pieces of themselves. We want them to do that in that space. And what we'll tell people is, like, we want the emotions from this experience to leave with you. Like, we want you to carry that with you. The details of the story, we want to keep those within the event itself to maintain that safety for the storytellers and for the reflectors too. Oftentimes in the reflections, people are being quite vulnerable with us, bringing up personal stories or professional experiences that are really tender. And we want them to feel free to do that in a way, knowing, like, hey, this isn't going to live on in perpetuity on the internet for decades to come, right? This is in this moment.
Yes.
There's also, I think we all agree that there's something about the shared experience of being in a room together, whether that's a virtual room or an in-person room. There's something there knowing that we're all in this space together, and we're not watching it later on. We're here now, and people will think we're crazy for saying this, but you can really feel it. Even in a virtual room, you can really feel the virtual campfire. Like, it's there, and that's what we want to capture.
We're in for a really powerful time together, and I would love to spend more time with you now, but we're running out of time. You guys need to get off to bed. It's been a long day. You need to care for your patients, for your family. You need to get off to bed, and I really appreciate the time you've put aside, and I'm looking forward to spending this time with you during National Palliative Care Week and getting a bit more of a sense of who you guys are as well, and what brings you to palliative care and the work you do in Boston. Thank you so much, Ricky. Thank you so much, Alexis. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for what you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Thanks,
Ian.
It's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Alexis Drutchas and Richard Leiter, two palliative care specialists behind the Palliative Story Exchange, which will be one of the highlights of National Palliative Care Week. If you have a story to share, please make a submission, and you can attend as a listener as well as part of the audience. You'll find more information and links to do both in the show notes. Thanks so much for tuning into Thursdays at 3, whether that's via PCA socials or Spotify, and engaging in matters of life and death. You'll find advice, tools, and support at the Palliative Care Australia website, where you can also make a donation to support our work. See you next Thursday.